Hey everybody, nice to see you again. Welcome to another week with WT's Wisdom on Lord of the Flies. It is April 21st and we're going to be discussing chapters 9 and 10 of the novel. Please make sure that you stay tuned for the whole video because not only do we close read the text, but I also will go over this week's choice assignments for you, and that's at the end of the video. Each video is about 30 to 40 minutes long, so just sit back and relax and let's talk about the novel. You will need your novel if you are following along with the book. If you're listening to the novel, you can just listen to me. You might also want a notebook and a pen if you want to take notes on this. But the first thing that we're going to do is our daily discovery, which is illusion number 4. We have done Blind Leading the Blind. We have done Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And we have done one more that I can't think of at the top of my... I don't remember. But today's is called Pandora's Box. I want to remind you what an illusion is because some people might just be tuning into this video and haven't caught any of the other videos, so I'll tell you again what an illusion is. It's when an author makes an indirect reference to something that originates from outside of the text. It could refer to something that happens earlier in the text also. The verb form of allusion is allude, so you could state that the writer alludes to or makes an allusion to something. A lot of allusions come from the Bible, mythology, or other literature. Allusions are subtle and indirect, hinting at something you're expected to know without explicitly telling you what it is. The literary device is used to enhance the text, often making it more relatable to the reader, or illustrating an example of the text's themes. Alright, so Pandora's Box. This one is really fascinating if you haven't heard of it before. You may have actually heard the saying, but not known where it comes from. This is a little longer than the other ones, but it's worth listening to, and once you know this, you won't forget it. So the background is, in ancient Greece, there were two brothers, Epimetheus and Prometheus. They upset Zeus, the most powerful of gods, so Zeus came up with a cunning plan to punish the two brothers. Zeus created a woman from clay. The goddess Athena then breathed life into the clay. Aphrodite made her very beautiful, and Hermes taught her how to be both charming and deceitful. Zeus called her Pandora, and he sent her as a gift to Epimetheus. Well, wasn't that nice? His brother Prometheus had warned him not to accept any gifts from the gods, but Epimetheus was completely charmed by the woman and thought Pandora was so beautiful that she could never cause any harm, so he agreed to marry her. Zeus, pleased that his trap was working, gave Pandora a wedding gift of a beautiful box. There was one very, very important condition, however, that she must never open the box. Well, can you imagine? Pandora was very curious about the contents of the box, but she had promised that she would never open it. Finally, she couldn't stand it any longer. When she knew Epimetheus was out of sight, she crept up to the box, took the huge key off a high shelf, fitted it carefully into the lock, and turned it. In the box, she found all of the terrible events that Zeus could come up with. Out of the box poured disease and poverty, misery, death, sadness, all shaped like tiny buzzing moths. The creatures stung Pandora over and over again, and she slammed the lid shut. Epimetheus ran into the room to see why she was crying in pain. Pandora could still hear a voice calling to her from the box, pleading with her to be let out. Epimetheus agreed that nothing inside the box could be worse than the horrors that had already been released, so they opened the lid once more. All that remained in the box was hope. It fluttered from the box like a beautiful dragonfly, touching the wounds created by the evil creatures and healing them. Even though Pandora had released pain and suffering upon the world, she had also allowed hope to follow them. So the meaning of this illusion, excuse me, I've got a little itchy nose. The myth is used to explain the existence of everything terrible in the world. As punishment for insulting Zeus, humanity was exposed to suffering and negativity. However, there is the positive aspect of hope, always hovering above these terrible things. When Pandora's box is alluded to in popular culture, it's usually a warning against curiosity. It is often human nature to wonder about what we do not know, especially when we're told we couldn't or shouldn't know it. If someone is about to open a Pandora's box, they're going to reveal information that may lead one to wish they had never learned it. And once this information is revealed, there is no forgetting it. Have you ever opened a Pandora's box and learned things that you wish that you could unlearn? I think we all have done that at one point or another, but that's illusion number 4. So now we're going to just jump into the novel, chapters 9 and chapters 10. And again, we're going to close read 4 passages from the book together. And wow, we've got some intense reading. Chapter 9 is probably the hardest chapter to read. And after reading it, you kind of sit with it for a minute and think, did that really happen? So at the beginning of chapter 9, it's called A View to a Death. And that should have foreshadowed to you that someone was going to die in that chapter. There's a storm that's building over the island. And the first thing I want you to remember is that there's no false lighting on the island. There's no electronics. There's no lights. There's no electricity. So it's pitch black there at nighttime. And when you have a massive storm, like you would get in many tropical regions, the lightning lights up the sky like you wouldn't believe. So Golding uses the weather as a vehicle in this novel to drive forward his themes. And the weather is symbolic of the evil that is being released in the boys, and it also is there to show the tension. One of the lines is that the air was ready to explode. So it sort of mirrors what's going on with the boys. And who knows if the storm building and brewing and exploding caused them to feel that frenzied way that they felt in chapter 9. But the storm builds over the island, and we've got Simon, who was in his special place, and he had witnessed the death of the mother pig, and then the consequential cutting off of her head and putting it on a stake, and then the conversation with the Lord of the Flies. Remember all of that from chapter 8. He had a seizure. He encountered the Lord of the Flies. And so he awakens from his stupor, his fainting episode, and he's not frightened because he knows the truth of the beast now, because he discovers something. He makes his way up to the mountain, and he sights the beast, which is the paratrooper's body entangled in the parachute, and he inspects it. And he realizes that it's human form and that they thought it was a beast, and it wasn't a beast, and so he wants to tell them about it. He also untangles the paratrooper from his parachute. And at the end of this chapter, if you were paying attention, the paratrooper sort of goes with the storm and is taken out to sea. So from where Simon is at the beginning of chapter 9, he can see that most of the boys are at the fire at Jack's camp, so he heads there. But he's so weakened by the experience of the day before that he can barely walk. So I want to take a look at... No, I don't. I don't want to take a look at anything right this second, but in a minute. So we've got Ralph and Piggy realizing that even the big ones are loyal to Ralph, that were loyal to Ralph, have gone now to Jack's party. So that's all that's left with Ralph are Ralph, Piggy, Simon, and the little ones. and Sam and Eric at this point. They decide that they want to go over to Jack's part of the island. They're sort of tempted by hunger and curiosity, and Jack allows them to eat, but when everyone is finished eating, he calls for all the boys to indicate whether they'd like to join his group or remain with Ralph's group. Ralph makes a pitch for the boys to stay with him, reminding them that he's the chief. Jack has a strong hold on them, however, playing up the role of tribal chief. And I wanted to look at page 150 for a second. 149. Right at the top. It's just like Jack. It says that before the party had started, a great log had been dragged into the center of the lawn, and Jack painted and garlanded. Garlanded means that he's wearing some sort of leaves or flowers around his neck and probably around his head like a crown. Sat there like an idol. There were piles of meat on green leaves near him, and fruit, and coconut shells full of drink. So the way that he's sitting is almost like he is a king on his throne, and his people are giving him food and drink as if he's worthy of that. So I thought that was interesting. Excuse me. Okay. So the storm breaks over the party, and it's really intense. I don't think I've experienced a storm like that. Maybe some of you have if you've been on vacation in a tropical area. But Jack orders a dance, excuse me, in response to the downpour of rain, and Ralph and Piggy join in the outer fringes of the dance as well. Suddenly, Simon crawls out of the forest and is the center of the dance circle. He's yelling, and he tries to tell them about the true identity of the beast that he sighted on the mountain, but he can't make himself heard over the storm and the boys chanting. The group turns on Simon as if he were a beast, and they kill him. The rain increases, and the boys back off, leaving Simon's body on the beach, and the night tide carries his body away. It's not until after they kill him and he's lying there and the storm has ended do they realize what a small beast it was. So I want to look at the death of Simon. Let me get the right page for you. Page 151. And this is a longer read. We're going to read to the end, but I would do it the same way in the classroom because it's super, super important. And I want to point out a few things to you. So in the middle of 151, there was a blink of bright light beyond the forest, and the thunder exploded again, so that the little ones started to whine. Big drops of rain fell among them, making individual sounds when they struck. Going to be a storm, said Ralph, and you'll have rain like when we dropped here. Who's clever now? Where are your shelters? What are you going to do about that? The hunters were looking uneasily at the sky, flinching from the stroke of the drops. A wave of restlessness set the boys swaying and moving aimlessly. The flickering light became brighter, and the blows of the thunder were only just bearable. The little ones began to run about screaming. Jack leapt onto the sand. Do our dance. Come on, dance. He ran stumbling through the thick sand to the open space of rock beyond the fire. Between the flashes of lightning, the air was thick and terrible, dark and terrible, and the boys followed him clamorously. Roger became the pig, grunting and charging at Jack, who sidestepped. The hunters took their spears, and the cooks took spits, and the rest clubs of firewood. A circling movement developed, and a chant. While Roger mimed the terror of the pig, the little ones ran and jumped on the outside of the circle. Piggy and Ralph, under the threat of the sky, found themselves eager to take a place in this demented but secure society. They were glad to touch the brown backs of the fence that hemmed in the terror and made it governable. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. The movement became regular while the chant lost its first superficial excitement and began to beat like a steady pulse. Roger ceased to be a pig and became a hunter, so that the center of the ring yawned emptily. Some of the little ones started a ring of their own, and the complementary circles went round and round as though repetition would achieve safety of itself. There was the throb and stamp of a single organism. The dark sky was shattered by a blue-white scar. The scar in this case is the lightning. An instant later, the noise was on them like a blow of a gigantic whip. The chant rose a tone in agony. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. Now out of the terror rose another desire, thick, urgent, blind. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. Again, the blue-white scar jagged above them, and the sulphurous explosion beat down, so the thunder is really intense too. The little ones screamed and blundered about, fleeing from the edge of the forest, and one of them broke the ring of big uns in his terror. Him! Him! The circle became a horseshoe. A thing was crawling out of the forest. It came darkly, uncertainly. The shrill screaming that rose before the beast was like a pain. The beast stumbled into the horseshoe. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood. The blue-white scar was constant and the noise unendurable, so the lightning is lighting up the sky. Simon was crying out something about a dead man on a hill. Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood, do him in. The sticks fell, and the mouth of the new circle crunched and screamed. The beast was on its knees in the center, its arms folded over its face. It was crying out against the abominable noise, something about a body on the hill. The beast struggled forward, broke the ring, and fell over the steep edge of the rock to the sand by the water. At once the crowd surged after it, poured down the rock, leapt onto the beast, screamed, struck, bit, tore. There were no words, and no movement but the tearing of teeth and claws. Then the clouds opened and let down the rain like a waterfall. The water bounded from the mountaintop, tore leaves and branches from the trees, poured like a cold shower over the struggling heap on the sand. Presently the heap broke up, and figures staggered away. Only the beast lay still, a few yards from the sea. Even in the rain they could see how small a beast it was, and already its blood was staining the sand. So in class, after we read this section, a lot of people wonder, did they know it was Simon? Well, like I said, the lightning was lighting up the sky, so they could probably see that it was Simon, and Simon was trying to holler to them and speak. They kill him not with their spears, which they had readily available, but with their hands and their mouths. They bite and they strike him and they tear his flesh. It's really brutal. I want to look at the last part of this chapter because we've talked about Simon as a Christ-like figure, that a lot of literary people have said that he is similar to Christ, and I just want to look at the light imagery that Golding uses to talk about Simon's death and how his body goes out to sea. So we're in the same section on page 153, and I'm going to skip, but I just want to say that it's toward midnight, and it says that the sky was scattered once more with the incredible lamps of stars. So now there's light all through the sky. The edge of the lagoon became a streak of phosphorescence that advanced minutely as the great wave of the tide flowed. Phosphorescence is glowing material. The clear water mirrored the clear sky and the angular bright constellations. The line of phosphorescence bulged about the sand grains and little pebbles. It held them each in a dimple of tension, then suddenly accepted them with an inaudible syllable and moved on. Along the shoreward edge of the shallows, the advancing clearness was full of strange, moon-bodied creatures with fiery eyes. So there's these little, minute sea creatures that are glowing, much like fireflies, I guess, in the air in this area. And they surround themselves around Simon's body. So it's almost as if he were glowing. Here and there, a larger pebble clung to its own air and was covered with a coat of pearls. Pearl is light imagery. Moon-bodied creatures is light imagery. The tide swelled in over the rain-pitted sand and smoothed everything with a layer of silver, light imagery. Now it touched the first of the stains that seeped from the broken body, and the creatures made a moving patch of light. As they gathered at the edge, the water rose farther and dressed Simon's coarse hair with brightness, light imagery. The line of his cheeks silvered, and the turn of his shoulder became sculptured marble, both light imagery. The strange attendant creatures busied themselves around his head. The body lifted a fraction of an inch from the sand, and a bubble of air escaped from the mouth with a wet plop. Then it turned gently in the water. I'm going to skip a little bit. The great wave of tide moved farther along the island, and the water lifted, softly, surrounded by a fringe of inquisitive, bright creatures, itself a silver shape beneath the steadfast constellations. Simon's dead body moved out toward the open sea. Beautiful and tragic. Absolutely. So that was chapter 9, View to a Death, which brings us to a different feel with chapter 10. Let me read a little bit to you, and then we'll close read some sections. So the next morning, if you noticed, Ralph finds only Piggy, Sam, and Eric, and some little ones at the camp. And they're all talking about the previous night's event. And he points out to Piggy that they murdered Simon. Piggy can't handle that, and he objects to the term murder, and he doesn't want Sam and Eric to know that he and Ralph were at the dance. Sam and Eric won't admit their own involvement either, so they pretend, and it's really kind of a comical scene, and I'm not going to read it to you, but if you didn't recognize that, reread the beginning of chapter 10 to see how Sam and Eric and Ralph and Piggy are denying the murder to each other. Jack begins acting even more like a cruel dictator to his own tribe members, having one of the boys tied up and beaten for angering him. He plans a raid on Ralph's camp to get fire for another pig roast, and tries to convince his uneasy followers that they had beaten but not killed the beast of the previous night. I wanted to point out on page 160 and 161, you can see my book is all marked up and underlined and circled, so you can't really follow along, but I wanted to point out to you that in this section, William Golding changes his language to describe Jack and his boys, and he uses the word savage 4 times on those pages. He pointed at the savage with his spear. A savage raised his hand. Each savage flinched, and the savage murmured again. Instead of calling them boys or tribe, he's referred to them as savages now. And instead of calling Jack Jack, he's referred to as Chief. And on page 161, he's called Chief a bunch of times. Perhaps said the Chief saw the effect. Chief, the Chief's blush. Yes, Chief, the Chief nodded. The Chief waved his objection aside. So I just thought that was interesting to note, the way that Golding changes his language there to point the reader in that direction. Savages and chiefs. So now Jack is completely in charge of most of the boys. That chapter also has a scene that is a little comical. The boys decide to let the fire, that Ralph and Piggy and Sam and Eric let the fire die rather than collect more firewood in the dark. And because Jack and his raiders can't steal burning branches, they attack Ralph's group and they steal Piggy's glasses. And this is the last part that I want a close read to. It's on page 166. It's the fight scene, and it goes to the end of this chapter. So it's nighttime. They're in the shelters, and Piggy can hear something moving outside. So right in the middle, quite clearly and emphatically, and only a yard or so away from the back of the shelter, a stick cracked. The blood roared again in Ralph's ears. Confused images chased each other through his mind. A composite of these things was prowling round the shelters. He could feel Piggy's head against his shoulder and the convulsive grip of the hand. Ralph, Ralph, shut up and listen. Desperately, Ralph prayed that the beast would prefer little ones. A voice whispered horribly outside. Piggy, Piggy. It's come, gasped Piggy. It's real. He clung to Ralph and reached to get his breath. Piggy, come outside. I want you, Piggy. Ralph's mouth was against Piggy's ear. Don't say anything. Piggy, where are you, Piggy? Something brushed against the back of the shelter. Piggy kept still for a moment. Then he had his asthma. He arched his back and crashed among the leaves with his legs. Ralph rolled away from him. Then there was a vicious snarling in the mouth of the shelter, and the plunge and the thump of living things. Someone tripped over Ralph, and Piggy's corner became a complication of snarls and crashes and flying limbs. Ralph hit out. Then he and what seemed like a dozen others were rolling over and over, hitting, biting, scratching. He was torn and jolted. He found fingers in his mouth and he bit them. A fist withdrew and came back like a piston so that the whole shelter exploded into light. Ralph twisted sideways on top of a writhing body and felt hot breath on his cheek. He began to pound the mouth below him, using his clenched fist as a hammer. He hit with more and more passionate hysteria as the face became slippery. A knee jerked up between his legs and he fell sideways, busying himself with his pain, and the fight rolled over him. Then the shelter collapsed with smothering finality, and the anonymous shapes fought their way out and through. Dark figures drew themselves out of the wreckage and flitted away till the screams of the little ones and Piggy's gasps were once more inaudible. So kind of a horrifying scene. Jack's folks come over and they fight Ralph's people in the middle of the night in the pitch black, and Piggy has an asthma attack, and the shelter that they worked so hard to build collapses. Ralph called out in a quavering voice, "All you little ones, go to sleep. We've had a fight with the others. Now go to sleep." Sam and Eric came close and peered at Ralph. "Are you two all right?" "I think so." "I got busted." "So did I. How's Piggy?" They hauled Piggy clear of the wreckage and leaned him against a tree. The night was cool and purged of immediate terror, and Piggy's breathing was a little easier. "Did you get hurt, Piggy?" "Not much." "That was Jack and the hunters," said Ralph bitterly. "Why can't they leave us alone?" "We gave them something to think about," said Sam. Honesty compelled him to go on. "At least you did. I got mixed up with myself in a corner." "I gave one of 'em what for," said Ralph. "I smashed him up all right. He won't want to come and fight with us again in a hurry." "So did I," said Eric. "When I woke up, one was kicking me in the face. I got an awful bloody face, I think, Ralph." "But I did him in the end. What did you do?" "I got my knee up," said Eric with simple pride, "and I hit him with it in the pills." "You should have heard him holler. He won't come back in a hurry either, so we didn't do too badly." So if you figured that out, actually Ralph and Eric were fighting with each other instead of Jack's tribe. Ralph moved suddenly in the dark, but then he heard Eric working his mouth. "What's the matter?" "Just a loose tooth." Piggy drew up his legs. "You all right, Piggy?" "I thought they wanted the conch." Ralph trotted down the pale beach and jumped onto the platform. The conch still glimmered, glimmered by the chief's seat. He gazed for a moment or two and then went back to Piggy. They didn't take the conch. I know. They didn't come for the conch. They came for something else. Ralph, what am I going to do? Far off along the bow stave of the beach, 3 figures trotted toward Castle Rock. They kept away from the forest and down by the water. Occasionally they sang softly. Occasionally they turned cartwheels down by the moving streak of phosphorescence. So they're passing the area where Simon's body is going out to sea. The chief led them, trotting steadily, exulting in his achievement. He was a chief now in truth. He made a stabbing motion with his spear. From his left hand dangled Piggy's broken glasses. If you have bad vision, like I do, there is nothing worse than being without your glasses. It's an incredibly vulnerable, scary feeling. And so now Piggy's left without his glasses, and we're left to wonder what's going to come next for these boys. So that's our close reading of chapters 9 and 10. For next week, you have to read chapter 11 and 12. That's the end of the novel. And do one of the 3 homework assignments. And I'm going to discuss those right now. They're on separate pages. And I'm not sure how it'll appear on Schoology. Because, as we all know, Schoology sometimes is a little tricky to use. But there's 3 choice assignments. You pick one. One of them looks like this. It's a chart. So for those of you who like to do things more academic and more cut and dry instead of a creative approach, this is probably the one for you. Basically, there's a list of 5 characters. Ralph, Piggy, Sam and Eric, Jack, and the Hunters. And then the other side of the chart is their reactions to Simon's death. What you have to do is find textual evidence for each character's reaction to Simon's death using direct quotes. Okay? If you have any questions, email me. The other 2 assignments I put on one page. One is to choose a character and find 10 quotes from the novel up to chapter 10, so chapters 1 through 10, that capture the character's changes throughout the novel. You're going to write down the quote and the page number and a brief explanation of why you chose that quote or what changes in the character that it shows. And I have an example written down. So I picked Simon, and the first time he speaks is on page 24, and he says to Ralph, "I'll come." This is the first time Simon speaks in the novel. They're going to explore the island, and it shows his willingness to help. That's my explanation. It literally took up this much space. The hardest part was finding a quote for Simon, but he's a tricky character. I suggest if you're going to do this quote, you pick a character that speaks a lot. So I would go with Piggy or Ralph or Jack. Those would be the easiest ones to do. You can submit this via email or Schoology. The assignment can be typed or handwritten. Take a picture of it and submit it if you want to do it that way. And the last one is more of a creative one. It's called Message in a Bottle. So you actually need to find a bottle or a jar or something like that. If you don't have a soda bottle, then use a mayonnaise jar that you clean out. It doesn't matter what it looks like. You need a piece of paper and a writing utensil. You're going to write an SOS message of 7 to 10 lines from one character, either Ralph, Piggy, Simon, or Sam and Eric. Your message should include how the character is feeling, what's going on with the boys at that time, and that rescue is required. The letter should be signed by the character that you choose. You're going to roll up the letter, stick it in the bottle, and 2 pictures need to be taken. One of the excuse me, the letter before you roll it up. So one of the letter itself, so I can read it and grade it, and one of the letter inside of the bottle. Okay, so I can see that you have the actual finished product as well, and then submit your pictures via Schoology or my email. So your three choices are the chart about Simon's death, choosing quotes from a character, or doing a message in a bottle. If you have any questions at any time, email me, okay? I have to take attendance for today. So once you watch this video, please either do your homework right away, and that's a way for me to take attendance, or shoot me an email and say, I'm here, or just checking in or something like that, because by Thursday, if I haven't heard from you, I'm going to start calling home and sending you emails bothering you that I need to hear from you for this week's attendance, okay? All right, again, I miss you guys. I'm trying to set up Zoom calls. Hopefully I'll see you virtually in person soon this week. But for now, take care.